And welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Going for Two, presented by our friends at Home Field Apparel. I am your host, Matt Brown, the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter. I'm joined here by my friend and colleague, Bryan Fischer of D1 Ticker. And we're excited today because we're marching through our conference previews. And I think a lot of our peers in this industry are doing conference previews. That's great. It's the thing to do. There's a bunch of schools to cover. Most of them are just centered around the Power Five. Maybe you have one that extends an olive branch to the G5, which is wonderful. We did the same thing here too. But we're all about getting into the weeds. So today, we're going to talk some FCS football. We're going to talk some structural big picture issues for FCS football. And we're going to talk about some actual teams and players because chances are at some point over the next couple of months, if you're a casual fan, you're going to find yourself watching an FCS football game. And many of you care very deeply about some of those FCS teams. We want to make sure that we reach you on that level as well, because we don't just want to write about them when someone's changing a conference.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll get into it a little bit with Sam Herder here in just a second. But what's great from my perspective is the visibility of a lot of these FCS games has skyrocketed. You know, you used to have maybe some illegal streams back in the day. If you really wanted to go after a few of these games, you know, maybe they're perhaps if you were lucky enough to have them on your local television sets, if you were say in the Big Sky territory or Mountain Missouri Valley Football Conference. But you know, now especially with a lot of these leagues on ESPN Plus, it's great. You know, if whether it's Friday night, whether it's Saturdays when things kind of get slow at the FBS level, it's fantastic to put on a lot of these teams. And certainly the amount of interest in terms of the FCS playoff, I think that has grown considerably in terms of just the casual fan being able to tune in and watch these games, whether they're on ESPN2 or ESPN Plus. It's been fantastic to kind of see the growth of FCS football, and I think more is coming not only to this level, but I think given the big changes that we look at and anticipate with Division I, I think a lot of news is going to be really made at this level as well.
Yeah, I think you're right there. It's going to be easier than ever to watch HBCU football games. There's going to be some Big Sky late at night. There's many of these games are simulcast locally. There's going to be several of them on TV in the beginning of the season as they play FCS opponents. And as we'll get to in this conversation with Sam, the on-field play, even after some very big defections from the FCS level, has arguably gotten better, right? As teams get better with nutrition, they get better resources, they get better talent evaluation and recruiting. There's fun football. There's good football. There's not the depth of football that there is at any other level. But the name brands are a little bit different.
So, and coaches are watching a lot of these games too to kind of identify a few folks that might be able to make that jump. You know, I think it was back in the day you might be able to get some film here or there, but now it's as easy as popping on ESPN Plus and finding some old archived broadcasts. And I mean, we'll see several impact FCS transfers, at the FBS level, even the Power 5 level. You look at Washington State starting quarterback. There are a lot of big names that are making that jump, and it just kind of proves that maybe the overall depth, over the course of the season can be exposed between the differences of the two levels. But one game, anything can happen, and we've seen that with the increased amount of FCS over FBS upsets the last couple of years.
Let's go ahead and kick it over here to Sam, who can tell us a little bit more about what to expect this season. Sam, thanks so much for taking some time here to chat with us. Let me start by asking maybe a very big picture question, because North Dakota State is, your preseason top program still has a near stranglehold on this level, but we've seen several high level programs leave FCS over the last decade. And there's going to be more leaving in the near future here as well. If you are a fan of somebody that's either with North Dakota State or somebody else near the top, is there a concern that the FCS is being diluted if there's no more James Madison or no more Sam Houston or no more of some of the schools that were challenging NDSU?
Yeah, I think that absolutely is a concern, and that's been a big talking point throughout last fall and into this offseason is, what is the FCS level? Where is it heading? And it's something I've talked about maybe a little bit too much in my podcast throughout the offseason of just, what the FCS is now compared to what it was in 2014. It's pretty different. And I think you can go two different ways with it. In my opinion, I think the FCS, as far as the talent it's bringing in, the talent on the field is better now than it was in 2014. I think the media attention and the overall exposure in the FCS is way better now than it was in 2013, 2014. And I honestly think some of the teams are better now than in 2014. A lot of teams have risen their game. For example, I think last year's East Tennessee State team probably would have beaten that 2013, 2014 App State team. So I think team-wise, it hasn't taken like a huge step back. The problem is the programs, right? ETSU may have been better than that App State team was when they left, but App State kind of carries that blue blood FCS weight to it. ETSU doesn't. And so when you have North Dakota State winning 9 of the last 11 national titles, it doesn't seem like many teams can close that gap. And then when you lose teams that at least have the ability to close that gap, like James Madison, Sam Houston, Jacksonville State, you can go back further to Coastal Carolina and all those teams. I think there is a concern of, is it really going to be NDSU winning another 8 national titles in the 2020s? And at what point does those FCS national titles stop meaning less because NDSU just keeps winning it? FCS fans are getting bored with the playoffs. NDSU fans are getting bored with the playoffs because they're dominating. So kind of long-winded way to say that, yes, it is very much a concern.
I mean, Sam, the NDSU president always seems to pretty much on a yearly basis now shoot down rumors of a move to FBS. I'm kind of curious, just given everything that's going on with Division I overall, how seriously might the school kind of look at making that jump?
Yeah, I think internally the want to go FBS has grown quite a bit in the last couple of years. I think I've definitely sensed a changing tide there where in 2018, it was, okay, FCS is the place we want to be. But in 2019, it's supposed to be a down year, quote unquote down year for NDSU. They go 16-0. It's kind of like, oh, geez, here we go. I think the COVID year also made NDSU reevaluate things because they wanted to play football in the fall. James Madison wanted to play in football in the fall. No other teams had the budget and the resources to do that and do all the testing. And so I think that kind of made NDSU go, are these really the peer institutions football-wise that we want to be with? And then this last year, just with those 3 teams moving on to the FBS, seems like a few more could come at any point if Conference USA wants to expand. I think that has really been the tipping point where NDSU has kind of held its card close to its chest. They'll always say, we're monitoring the situation, we're positioning ourselves where if that opportunity ever comes, we can make the right decision. So they're not really being aggressively public toward, we want to go to the next level. But I think internally, I think they want to go FBS somehow, some way, but they want it to be the right situation. Conference USA isn't the right situation. Mountain West is the dream situation. I even think if the American called, I don't know if that would ever happen, but I think they would even consider that because they rely a lot on ticket revenue. That's the difference between FCS and FBS, that there's no TV dollars in it, and not a lot of FCS teams rely on ticket revenue. Montana does, Montana State does, NDSU does. Well, that ticket revenue is going down because they don't sell out anymore because fans are getting bored. And so, like I said, if NDSU wins 8 more national titles and it's 2029, I mean, what are we doing here? Exactly.
On that note, let the record state, because I think the last time you and I talked, Sam, I got into a little bit of trouble about this. Let the record state, Conference USA has strongly pushed back on the idea that they've had any conversations, informally or otherwise, with North Dakota State. My understanding is North Dakota State's athletic director has done the same. So forgive me for being imprecise with my language before. That is the official line on that particular front from those both parties. This will come up the next time I ask Conference USA about something. So I want to make sure that was stated here on the air. You did mention what I think are 2 of the more interesting programs heading into this year, because there are a couple of more blue blood-ish or programs that have a defined brand and have been successful before. In Montana and Montana State, looking at the preseason polls, looking at the expectations for those programs, they're both expected to be very, very strong. I want to say they're both I think both preseason top 5. Who do you think right now is the stronger Montana on paper heading into this season?
That's tough. I mean, Montana has more coming back. I do think Montana State might have the edge right now. I realize that the Grizz beat the Bobcats last year in the Brawl of the Wild, but Tommy Malott, the Montana State starting quarterback, he wasn't playing then. Then there was kind of a mess. Right before the playoffs, Matt McKay entered the transfer portal. Montana State's starting quarterback, and so everyone's like, Montana State starting quarterback just entered the transfer portal right before the playoffs. Well, it turns out he actually got benched, and Tommy Malott freshman from Montana, came in and kind of led them to the national title game. And so I think that is kind of, I think they're on par, but that's the difference in to me is the starting quarterback position. Montana has a question mark there. Montana State doesn't. But as far as just kind of the overall programs, yeah, you look at any top 25 out there preseason wise, whether it's someone's personal ballot or different polls out there, it's all North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Montana State in the top 4 in some order. And kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about kind of program, not talking about like team, but like program and who wants to be good in FCS football, who wants to invest. Those are 4 programs right there. And especially the Montana schools, new facilities, passionate fan bases, not a lot of competition around them FBS wise. I broke some news earlier this week about Montana State is launching, or not Montana State, but there's an NIL collective launching for Montana State football players. And that could be a difference maker right there, because I believe there's one other known one in the FCS, which is Grambling. There is another one that I was told about down south, but they're public, but not exactly public. And so I'm kind of working on, what I can say about that one. But basically, there's not a lot. They're not a lot in the FCS, and so Montana State is building, toward being a true contender.
Well, we might have to revisit those NIL discussions in a second, but talking about the Montana schools in particular, I mean they're coming into a new media deal with the Big Sky to get some more over-the-air exposure for a lot of local stations, in that region. We've seen a lot of these conferences have deals with ESPN Plus, so as a fan, it's so much easier now to watch FCS football. And I'm curious how you kind of see the investment paying off from those TV dollars, if there are some, and as well as the exposure standpoint for a lot of these FCS schools moving forward.
Yeah, I think the exposure part of it is huge, because before the Big Sky aired their games on Pluto TV, which was okay. It was free, but it wasn't. There's just the broadcasts were kind of varied. It wasn't that great, but to just have that ESPN Plus, ESPN in the corner of your games or on the scoreboard going down at the bottom of the screen for games. I think that's a huge recruiting advantage. I think that's the main thing, honestly, is the recruiting, just the exposure, less about the revenue. I want to say, I don't think I'm too inaccurate in this, but it's right around $100,000 per school for the Big Sky. And some of that for some schools goes toward broadcasting equipment and cameras and stuff like that. And so it's not we're not talking $7 billion or whatever the hell the Big Ten is, but it is something, right? And so I think all FCS conferences besides the CAA now have some sort of partnership with ESPN, and that just makes the overall level a lot easier to watch instead of scrolling through 1,000 channels on Pluto TV.
That's exactly what they told us too. Like, my understanding is that other companies were aggressively looking to secure FCS football bids and bid above what ESPN was offering, but that discoverability won out. It's easier to say if you get Plus, you're going to get just about every important FCS football game rather than some other smaller streaming service. I want to ask you about something a little bit more on the field. Looking back with last year, one of the more exciting FCS quarterbacks was Cameron Ward at UIW, a program that hadn't really been successful before. Carried them to one of their I think their best season ever, one of their best seasons ever. He's at Washington State now, along with his offensive coordinator. I know UIW is still getting some preseason love in the beginning of the year. For people that haven't watched a ton of FCS football, who are the quarterbacks that they need to be aware of? Either because these are people that might become FBS quarterbacks, or because they're going to be playing late at night or on another channel, and you should be watching them because they're fun, independent of being a potential FBS QB.
Yeah, I think the first one that comes to mind is Jason Shelley, who's kind of opposite. He went from FBS to FCS. Yeah. I believe he had a stop at Utah and then Utah State, or vice versa. He made those first 2 stops, and now he's at Missouri State, who's making a huge jump under Coach Petrino. And so he's one to watch. That, in my opinion, I think he's the best quarterback in the FCS. Another one as well is Shedeur Sanders. Deion Sanders' son at Jackson State, 4-star recruits. When he committed to Jackson State a couple of years ago, that was kind of unheard of a 4-star recruit going to an FCS school. Now I shouldn't say it's the norm. It's not the norm, but we've seen it a couple of other times. I mean, Jackson State landed the number 1 overall recruits this last recruiting class. But he's was the freshman of the year last year, super talented. He leads a team that a lot of people have their eye on in the FCS, just of how good Jackson State can be. How do they compare to the North Dakota States of the world? And so those are 2 to keep an eye on. Another one too is Cam Miller from North Dakota State. He's interesting because he's not Trey Lance, he's not Carson Wentz. He may not even be Easton Stick, 3 draft picks from North Dakota State. And because of that, maybe even some NDSU fans are like, he's okay. But I think he's pretty good. I think he might have like undrafted free agent level of talent. So I think he could be another pro quarterback from the FCS because, again, I think he's pretty good, but he's being compared to Trey Lance, which isn't exactly fair. And so those are just some of the names that come to mind.
It's interesting talking about a lot of these quarterbacks. You didn't bring up the one at South Dakota State, who's had some success in the past, and I believe is returning from injury, if memory serves. Looking at the MVFC, is South Dakota State kind of that biggest challenger just from an overall talent level to North Dakota State, not just in the league, but also for the national title?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's Mark Gronowski, who had a fabulous 2021 spring season, but tore his ACL in the spring national title game, missed last fall. So South Dakota State brought in Chris Oladokin, who ended up getting drafted, I believe, in the 7th round. But Gronowski is back. By all accounts, his knee is looking good. That's going to be the interesting part because the main storyline during the spring in the FCS is how legit is this season, so many COVID cancellations and all that. And there was some stuff that carried over from the spring to the fall, and there was a lot of stuff that didn't, like Sam Houston, defending champs, got whooped up on by Montana State in the playoffs. And so the question with South Dakota State is, should have a good defense, great weapons. They might have a few draft picks on offense, Tucker Kraft, Jackson Yonke, excuse me. The question is Mark Gronowski, can he replicate what he did in the spring? I think he can. He kind of has that gamer mentality to him. And to answer your question, yes, I do think South Dakota State is the top contender to North Dakota State in all of the FCS. I think if there's one team that can go toe-to-toe with NDSU for all 4 quarters, especially in the trenches, it is the Jackrabbits. And they've done that too in the regular season, winning 4 of the last 6 regular season matchups. It's just, and I've said this a lot, NDSU turns into a different animal in the playoffs, whereas South Dakota State kind of comes up short, when they need it the most. And so that's the difference between NDSU and South Dakota State right now. But it seems like we could get an all Dakota, all Missouri Valley Football Conference matchup in Frisco this year for the national title.
One of the fun games that I know my corner of the internet likes to play over the first couple of weeks at the beginning of the college football season is trying to figure out which FCS teams are going to kick some FBS teams' ass. Which happens every year. And sometimes it's the really, really good FCS teams that does it. And sometimes it's a middling 6-5 team that catches a bad MAC squad on the right day and clobbers them. I realize it's maybe putting you on the spot here for a little bit. If you want to pull up the schedule tab, like open here. But in those first couple of weeks, are there any games that you see like, wow, this has a lot of upset potential? I really like how Portland State matches up in X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, I did this article, it was probably a few months ago, so I kind of had to remind myself of which games I picked. But I mean, no surprise, the first one I have is North Dakota State going to Arizona. It won't surprise me if the Bison were a betting favorites, in that game. That rarely happens where you see an FCS team is, -3 versus an FBS team. I know it happened last year, I think, when Holy Cross played like UConn or UMass or something like that. So, games like that, you might see it. But, Arizona is tough because they're bringing in a lot of transfers, but I think NDSU could win that game decisively. May not decisively, but, win by 10 some points. Another one is Sac State going to Colorado State. We saw South Dakota State beat up on Colorado State pretty good last year. And so I think Sac State has an opportunity to win that game. Colorado State is another team that brought in a lot of transfers. So that could be, we'll see, what that team looks like. Another one too, and Matt, you mentioned this, is a lot of times it's easy to look at the top teams where they're playing FCS wise, where they're playing in the FBS, but there's a lot of middling FCS teams that play really bad FBS teams. And so whenever I see UMass playing an okay CAA team. This year it's Stony Brook. I kind of circle that and go,
yeah,
Stony Brook's okay. They're not bad. They're always tough, play really good defense, kind of, black and blue style of program. I think they can go there, and beat UMass. And then one more that, on the record, I'm not saying this is going to be an FCS over FBS win, but I think South Dakota State going to Iowa is going to be a really, really good game. I think that's a one possession game. Yeah. In the fourth quarter. I don't know if the Jacks are going to win, but I think they're going to have an opportunity to late in that game.
I was looking at that one, and I was looking at UC Davis and Cal, because I look at both those P5 offenses as systems that are generally not able to pull away from people, and even if they're whooping up on the line of scrimmage, could there be 8 minutes left and it's 20-14 for either of those games? Yeah, like that definitely sounds like something that's possible. Yeah, I mean those make sense. Looking around like at some of the other kind of struggling FBS teams outside of UMass, though, I don't know if the matchups are great. Like I could think a lot of FCS teams that could beat New Mexico, but I pick Maine, maybe not.
Yeah.
But we shall see. Is there anybody looking into this season that is not a perennial playoff participant, or somebody that's seen a lot of success recently that you think, I think they could really take a big jump? Somebody that maybe didn't make the playoffs last year that could be in that conversation for this year?
Yeah, I definitely think that's Stephen F. Austin. Now they did make the playoffs last year, but they lost in the first round. But they're getting a lot of top 10 preseason love. And a lot of people will say, how can a team that lost right away in the playoffs to UIW be viewed that highly? But I think SFA is certainly on the rise under their head coach, Colby Cartel. He's gone from, like, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like from 4-7 to 6-4 to last year 8-4 overall. I know SFA has seen like an 85% increase in ticket revenue in his 3 years there.
Wow.
And so that's a fan base that's starting to get into it. And I've heard, they have a great AD as well. Ryan Ivey, I believe is his name. And I've heard him do some interviews saying, hey, we know we're SFA, we're known for basketball. Like, we get that, but we don't want to be just a basketball school. We want to be good in football as well. And so I think they're making some investments there to compete at a national level. And like 8 of 11 top tacklers coming back, All-American quarterback, All-American wide receiver, experienced offensive line, a pretty favorable schedule. Who do they? Their FBS opponent is
the whack ASUN schedule they were having that was like duct taped together like 2 days ago. I had to look this stuff up too. I don't remember who they're playing either.
Yeah, it's an odd whack ASUN challenge they have going on there. But even their FBS opponent for SFA, Louisiana Tech. Louisiana Tech almost lost to SLU last year. It was like 45-42. And so I think that could be another FCS over FBS win. And so I think SFA is shaping up to be a contender. Now, again, this is the kind of the, not the problem, but the thing with the FCS is SFA is, I think, going to be really good by FCS standards. Can they beat NDSU? No, they would probably lose by 17-21 points to NDSU, but it's hard to compare FCS wise when you're comparing them to NDSU. Like, Montana State's defense was really, really good last year, have some NFL guys on there, and they got rolled up on by NDSU. And so I think SFA is going to be really good. Can they challenge NDSU? I don't think so, but they could be a quarterfinal, semifinal team.
Yeah, and that's fine. Just like we talk about teams on for the last couple of weeks at the FBS level that we think are good, that will probably still lose to Ohio State by 21 points, right? Like, that's just like we often preach to not let the college football playoff dictate your fan experience, this entire enterprise. It seems like a good idea for an FCS fan as well, particularly if you're a root for somebody on the East Coast or on the Northeast. Like, I mean, that would stink if you were a Colonial Athletic Association fan and only defined your experience with could we beat North Dakota State? It's just probably not. Yeah,
I think that's fair too. And I think that's kind of where, like, kind of with the FCS, a lot of teams, maybe they won't win a national title, but a run to the quarterfinals is, like, it's not their championship, but it's a huge deal. Like ETSU, when they made a run to the quarterfinals last year, like that's like a huge deal. And so I think a lot of fan bases now aren't defining their season on if they win a national title, but hey, if we make the playoffs, that's great. If we win a couple games in the playoffs, like that's awesome for us. And so that's a good point.
Speaking of huge deals, I would be remiss if we didn't go to Jackson State. And given all their success last year, they make it all the way to the Celebration Bowl, kind of laid an egg, I guess you could say. But I mean, Dion has gotten a lot of attention, not just for bringing in Travis Hunter. I think he's on the radar of several FBS ADs that, you know what, maybe given the amount of publicity and the good job that he has done there at Jackson State in terms of fundraising for facilities, not only bringing in talent, but really kind of getting that program going in the right direction. What can we expect out of Jackson State this year, and are they kind of close to making a big run of going undefeated again?
Yeah, I think they have a great opportunity to go 11-0 this season. A big defining factor in that will be the Week 1 game against Florida A&M, which is that could determine if let's say Jackson State does lose that game. That might mean if Florida A&M goes undefeated in the SWAC, that might mean Jackson State can't play in the SWAC title game, which means they might be eligible for an at-large bid in the playoffs, which that'd be kind of sweet. But I do think Jackson State will win that game. I think they have a great chance to go undefeated, go to the SWAC title game, win that one, and then go on to the Celebration Bowl. I think they have a ton of talent. I know they brought in a lot of transfers. I believe a handful on the offensive and defensive line. And I think that's the big difference between like a Jackson State and a top 10 team in the FCS. I still think there is a gap there in the trenches. And I know one of the talking points between the FCS community is, Celebration Bowl versus the playoffs. Celebration Bowl makes revenue. The FCS playoffs don't for FCS teams. Can Jackson State schedule tougher in the non-conference? Can they schedule a North Dakota State to see how they stack up against those top teams? And so it's going to be interesting because you look at a lot of the polls and Jackson State is in that 13 to 19 range, but they're going to, in my opinion, I think they're going to keep on winning and winning and winning. And I'm already mentally preparing myself for my mentions when I have 8-0 Jackson State, number 13, and maybe a 6-2 Weber State team, number 9. But it's going to be really hard to gauge Jackson State on how good they are when their toughest non-conference game is Campbell, who's okay. Maybe they're like in the 30s and 40s, but they don't play a top 25 team. Their strength of schedule is probably going to be in the 90s. Yeah. And so I think they're a really good team. I just don't know if they're top 10 yet. And regarding Coach Sanders, it seems like he might be, is going to get a lot of FBS interest, but I personally hope he stays at Jackson State for a long time because I think what he's doing there, what he's doing for the SWAC, what he's doing for the HBCUs is phenomenal. And I think that just obviously helps the FCS as a whole. And hopefully, if Jackson State goes 13-0 this year, maybe he says, maybe we want a piece of the FCS playoffs, and maybe that kind of gets things moving in a way where maybe the FCS can find a way to maybe get more revenue in the FCS playoffs. Is all of a sudden you have Deion Sanders saying, why is this way? Why can't it be that way? And it seems like a lot of times Coach Sanders says something like, why aren't SWAC games on ESPN? Next thing you know, there's a few games every year on ESPN2 involving SWAC teams. And so
he's been able to manifest some things for sure.
Yeah.
You touched on the last team that I wanted to ask you about, which is Campbell. Because for all of the attention that Jackson State, and deservedly so, has gotten for talent acquisition, they've signed a couple of really high-end recruits. They've been aggressive in the transfer portal. But I've written about this too. The team that signed the best 24/7 recruiting class in terms of high schoolers was Campbell. And Campbell, they're moving up to the Colonial Athletic Association in a couple of years. They have signed a lot of 3-star kids that should be, or on paper should be Sun Belt or Conference USA guys, if not more, but they haven't shown that on the field. It's been a young team. I want to say they've only been giving scholarships for like a decade or maybe less than that. How long do you think it will take to turn recruiting potential into on-field results, and where people to think about Campbell for something more than just having an extremely funny mascot?
Yeah. I think they're still a couple of years away. Like you said, the number 1 ranked recruiting class, I believe it's 11 combined 3 or 4 star recruits in this last class, which is, again, pretty unheard of in the FCS. But that's why I go back to, I think the talent overall coming into the FCS, whether it's recruiting or the transfer portal. I know there was concern that it's just going to be a bunch of FCS standouts going to the FBS, and we've seen that, but I think in my tracker, I'm probably off by a few numbers, but there was about 170 FCS transfers going to the FBS, which seems like a lot, but there's 500 plus FBS players coming to the FCS. And so that's kind of a side tangent there. But I do think Campbell is doing a great job bringing in great talents. I believe they brought in some transfers as well. I do still think they're a ways away, not a ways away, but a couple of years away to just build out that depth. I know next year they are joining the CAA. I think that's going to take some quote unquote getting used to, because that's just a different level of play when you go from the Big South to the CAA. Next year will be the Big South OVC Association thing. But yeah, I do think there will be kind of a climbing period for Campbell going to the CAA, where I don't think they're going to contend for the CAA right away. But they have a great coach. They have things in place where it seems like they want to be good in the FCS. And frankly, the FCS kind of needs some teams to step up like that in that region of the country. So it's not all Dakota and Montana schools deep into the playoffs.
It is kind of funny how, like, if you overlay the FBS talent concentration and power program map, which is so heavily concentrated in the Southeast, where the big brands and championship caliber teams are, and then you overlay the FCS one, and that seems to be one of the big gaps. I mean, like, there are good FCS teams there, and there's a lot of talent that flows from the FBS to want to play closer to home in the FCS, but the championship caliber teams and a lot of the blue blood teams, it's the Dakotas, it's Montana, it's Utah increasingly, it's the different parts of Texas and the rural parts of the Midwest that are absent in the Big Ten. I'm sure there's related there. I'm sure there's a demographic story behind it, but it is funny that you can almost like put the two maps on top of each other and not have a ton of overlap.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, it's interesting. And I think there's North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Montana, they have that advantage where, you look at the FCS teams and kind of the Southeast, they just can't, they're competing. They're trying so hard to get attention, but there's so many FBS schools around them where it's hard to get media attention. It's hard to get fans to come. It's hard to get recruits when, there's so many FBS schools, G5, Power 5 around, whereas for the Montana schools, there's only so many Division I schools, out west. And so you might get a lot of guys that maybe don't have a lot of FBS offers just because they play in Washington or Utah. Yeah. Whereas if they played in, somewhere in the Southeast, maybe they would have gotten 10 FBS offers, but because they play in the West, they only have 2 FBS offers and they go to Montana State. And so I think there are advantages there being in those more rural areas where you're not competing with a bunch of other FBS teams.
Certainly. Bryan, did you have anything else?
No, I guess we could probably get you out of here on this. Is there's been some rumors, discussions, veiled public comments about potential FCS playoff expansion. I know there's been a lot of talk about that at the FBS level, especially now that the Big Ten deals are done. But what is kind of the state of the FCS playoffs, and will this be a sport really that once the NCAA actually goes back to the marketplace for a lot of their TV contracts in the next couple of years, is this a place where they could get some big increases out of that new deal?
Yeah, so for the FCS playoff expansion, that's something Big Sky Commissioner Tom Wischersill told me about on my podcast, and he I understood the reasons he laid out at the time. This was back in like February, where his idea was to make the FCS playoffs go from 24 teams to 28 teams, and the reason for that is the increase in auto bids, where there's going to be 2 or 3 more auto bids, which means less at-large bids that would usually go to the 4th place Big Sky team, the 4th place or 5th place Valley team. I mean, his thought was that's going to weaken the FCS playoffs. Well, since then, usually the FCS playoffs are 10 auto bids, 14 at-large bids. For a little bit, it seemed like that was going to be 12 and 12 with the WAC and the ASUN having their own auto bids. Now they're combining for 1 auto bid. Next season in 2023, the Big South and the OVC are combining for 1 auto bid. And so where it looked like it was going to be 12 and 12, now all of a sudden it's back to 10 and 14. And I asked Tom, like, now that it's back to the normal 10 and 14, what's your thought on expansion? He said, it's kind of tabled for now, but at any point, if they get membership, at any point, the Big South and the OVC can separate again and have their own auto bids. It's the same thing with the WAC and the ASUN. And so it's something they're monitoring, but I think that has kind of cooled off as far as expanding. As far as the new, if and this is something you guys would probably know, more than me, and something, Matt, I plan on asking you at some point of, with the current ESPN streaming deal and broadcasting deal where they basically air a bunch of, NCAA run tournaments, that deal ends in a couple of years. Is the FCS popular enough to be sold separately? I don't know. As someone who's an advocate for the FCS and someone who loves the FCS, thinks it's a great brand of football. The games when they are on national TV, they get over, not always, but they average around 1 million viewers, which I think is more than baseball and softball, or right on par with baseball and softball, from what I've looked into. I know like the women's basketball tournament is probably going to be sold separately, deservedly so. I don't know the ratings for that, but I mean, I don't know if when the FCS championship game got on ABC, that got a couple million viewers, which I know is not what Ohio State is the college football playoff is going to get, but it's pretty good, in my opinion. So, and that's something Tom Wistersill told me is, can we separate it? Can we sell it on its own, whether Fox Sports wants it, or, Fox Sports 1 or ESPN wants to do a better deal for us, whatever the case may be, can we generate revenue for that? I honestly don't know. I like to say yes, but then again, is there a want for the FCS football playoffs that get pretty good ratings, but not, huge, massive ratings? So I don't know if you guys have any insight on that. I know it's a big question right now, because I went on North Carolina A&T's podcast and they asked me, does any FCS school make money playing in the FCS playoffs? And I said, no, not really, but there is other aspects of it as far as exposure. And I know Montana's former AD told me about the economic impact of hosting 3 playoff games, and that gets funneled back into the athletic department through those businesses and bars and restaurants. But if there is a way to better generate revenue in the FCS playoffs, I think that'd be great. But I don't know if you guys have any insight on that. I know a lot of people would hear what you guys have to say.
I don't know a good solution to this yet. It would surprise me a little bit if the FCS playoffs were sold out of that package, because it's one of those things that is popular enough to drive views, but not so popular that you can spin it off like the women's basketball tournament necessarily. And you need to still have some popular things that you can package so you can find a bidder for the track and field championships or for some other things that the NCAA wants. I think I'd have to report that out a little bit more. The idea that there is frustration about not being able to properly control the revenue or financially benefit from a deep FCS playoff run is something I've heard a lot. How to fix it? I would need to make more phone calls, I think.
I think one way to fix it is maybe if you don't get a great TV deal or whatever, is to go away with the bidding process. If you're an unseeded team, you have to bid to host. And the fact that the NCAA takes 85% of the ticket revenue from these home playoff games, I think is egregious. I understand why they do it, because they're paying for everyone to travel around. And so if the NCAA doesn't want to lose a ton of money on the FCS playoffs, they're going to eat a lot of that ticket revenue. But if I'm North Dakota State, Montana, if I'm any of the commissioners, I'm going to the NCAA and saying, hey, like 85% of the ticket revenue is crazy. Like, why is NDSU, who's selling 18,000 tickets, why are they losing money hosting these games, and you guys are eating 85% of the tickets? So I think that's one way to fix it. But again, the NCAA might say, well, for us to pay for all this travel, this is what we have to do. So again, it's a tough market and it's a tough subdivision, because there's a lot of interest in it, but it's not close to the level of FBS interest. And so there's not a lot of revenue and money to be made, but I think there is more than what is currently being made. But those are, people smarter than me have to try to figure that out.
Well, I think you've given us some ideas for some other stuff that we want to write about maybe after this season. That might be a little bit of a difficult story to track down in October. But Sam, thanks again for taking so much time for us here. Congratulations on all of the big success, the shows moving off YouTube and everything. And we'll be sure to check in again as we get through this FCS season.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on, and always great to talk some FCS football on some more national platforms like this one. So thanks again.
You got it. Friends, I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to also shout out our good friends at Home Field Apparel, the finest purveyors of officially licensed vintage collegiate apparel. You can find a bunch of really great FCS stuff across Home Field Apparel. One of my wife's favorite shirts is a North Dakota State shirt, which is fun to wear around here in Chicago, because then people start asking her about Dakota things. I don't think she's ever even been to the state. Certainly never been on campus. But stolen valor is a foundational principle of what makes home field great. For example, I'm wearing an Illinois shirt. I live in Illinois. I've been to Illinois campus a couple of times. Did I go there? No. But people will think I did when I wear this shirt. So they'll think I'm good at math, which is fun. Several of the Dakota programs, several of the Big Sky programs are available on Home Field Apparel. And of course, the biggest program of all, the just published here, the finishing up this season of Big News Saturday, the Ohio State Buckeye Collection. You're shaking your head.
Well, I'm a little sad. This is the end of Big Noon Saturday, so I like
it's the end of this
like a little
season.
Bit of a loss,
Yeah, there will be others. They have not found every single school yet. I know, but they've talked to schools through us and through others. Maybe the next Big News season, Big News Saturday, is all about Division II. I will say this about the collection. Ohio State collection was great, but Ohio State doesn't have decades of really weird, goofy animal lore and IP the same way that maybe other places do. And maybe Ohio State didn't want to license some of the really bizarre Brutus Buckeye stuff that you're going to be able to find for other things. But still buy those shirts. Buy shirts from other places. And when you do, use promo code EXTRAPOINTS to save 15% off of that order. And if you would like us to shill for your thing the way we so enthusiastically shill for home field shirts, the email address is sales@extrapointsmb.com. We will wrap up the rest of our preview series here very soon as we prepare for actual honest-to-God football coming up. Excited about a couple of the other interviews that we've had recently on Collegiate Sports Connect. I had a chance to do a couple that I thought were fascinating about volleyball. Not just about volleyball, but a coach at Rutgers who brought in like a corporate communications person to help their volleyball team learn how to talk to each other, which I don't think I fully appreciated was a especially unique challenge in volleyball, but it is. And you know what? If you learn how to deliver direct feedback to somebody you care about, but still communicate high expectations, that's like 3/4 of what marriage counseling is. But this is going to make you a good boss, make you successful in a bunch of other things. We have that on there, and some good stories on Extra Points about media rights, about the Big Ten television deal, about Division II television deals, which you can find all at extrapointsmb.com. Bryan, anything else you'd like to plug for the people before we let them go?
No, I mean, I think that just about covers it. I mean, you mentioned Collegiate Sports Connect. We have several fun interviews at the end of last week and going into this week that, not only on the docket, but already published. I mean, we were talking with somebody that worked at Vanderbilt who is, their son is in the Little League World Series and they're a coach. So some unique interest stories that go beyond just the football field, or, you mentioned media rights. We have a ton of stuff on that already, but if you're a little tired of people discussing what this Big Ten TV deal, here's a nice heartwarming story going into the Little League World Series this weekend. Yeah,
be sure to check Collegiate Sports Connect's free, and we will share some more of that moving very forward. Bryan, go get some sleep. I'm gonna go pound a Red Bull myself because it's been a couple of days. We got to get ready. We'll catch up with y'all on the internet again very soon.